The disappearance of the Chandler family began with a silent campsite by the lake, and no trace of where they'd gone. Behind it all stood Alvin Huffer, a man with a false identity who hid something far darker than anyone imagined. But fate had one final move. And Kylie, the girl thought lost forever, emerged from the shadows carrying the truth no one was ready for. But just wait until you see how this haunting mystery twisted, and why, in the end, justice didn't just catch up, it struck back. On Friday, July 21st, 2017, the Chandler family arrived at Silver Ridge Lake in the heart of Washington state. The gravel crackled beneath the tires of their dark green Toyota Tacoma as it rolled to a stop at the designated campsite, just a few hundred feet from the water. Mark Chandler, 42, stepped out first, stretching his arms like a man finally free. He had always been drawn to the solitude of the outdoors, campfires, birdsong, the absence of traffic, and email notifications. His face carried the calm assurance of someone who had planned every detail of the weekend with care. Linda, 40, followed him, her long brown hair tied in a practical braid under a sun hat. She clutched a worn leather journal to her chest, the same one she brought every year to record simple joys. What the kids found along the trails, the color of the sunset, Mark's jokes, which wildflowers had bloomed. Their daughter Kylie, 12, hopped out next, already wearing her hiking boots and carrying a small bag of polished rocks she'd collected from previous trips. She had a curious mind and a quiet spirit, always searching for meaning in the little things. Last came Josh, just 8, small but full of energy, clutching a red flashlight with stickers peeling off. He named it Flashy and treated it like a pet. They were a picture of normalcy, loving, grounded, and experienced in the woods. Mark set up their tent within 20 minutes, joking that he could build shelter faster than any ranger. Linda unpacked the food and wrote down their arrival time in her journal. Arrived safely, 5:37 p.m. Lake calm, kids excited. Mark made us laugh again. That evening, they built a fire, roasted hot dogs, and watched the sky turn orange and lavender. The stars above Silver Ridge Lake came out early that time of year. No phones, no distractions, just them and the forest. Saturday passed uneventfully. Kylie spent the morning by the water collecting smooth black stones, while Josh used his flashlight, even in daylight, to explore the woods behind the tent. Mark and Linda took turns paddling the lake in their inflatable kayak, waving to the kids every few minutes. Linda made a note about an eagle nesting nearby. Josh claimed he saw something move in the trees, but Kylie just laughed and tossed another pebble. By evening, Mark was grilling burgers, and Josh was chasing a dragonfly near the lake's edge. Everything felt safe. Sunday morning came with birdsong and the smell of pine. Linda wrote one last line in her journal before closing it. Last day, leaving after lunch. Feels like we could stay forever. That entry would later be one of the most closely analyzed pieces of evidence in the investigation. They were scheduled to return home by Sunday evening. Mark had work on Monday morning, and Linda had a dental appointment she wouldn't have missed, but they didn't come back. By 10 a.m., Monday, July 24th, Mark's co-worker grew concerned. Mark never missed work, and he hadn't replied to any messages over the weekend, which was unlike him. By noon, both children's schools had been contacted, just to confirm they hadn't shown up for summer activities. At 2 p.m., the police were notified. At 11:15 a.m. on Tuesday, 2 forest rangers reached Campsite 11, the Chandler's reserved location. What they found chilled them. The camp was still there. The tent stood upright, perfectly staked into the soft earth. 2 sleeping bags were unzipped inside, one with a paperback novel resting on top. Plates with partially prepared sandwiches lay on the fold-out picnic table, one with a bite taken out. The cooler was half open, drinks still cold inside. A pot with uncooked noodles sat on a small camp stove. And the campfire, it was still faintly smoldering. Josh's red flashlight lay near the lake, resting beside a small blue jacket. It looked like someone had set it down carefully, not dropped it in panic. There were no footprints leading away from the site, no tire marks, no drag marks, no signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, nothing broken. Even the kayak, deflated and rolled up, was tied neatly to a tree. The Toyota Tacoma was gone. It was as if the entire family had simply stood up in the middle of lunch and vanished. The ranger radioed for backup. Within the hour, law enforcement had cordoned off the area. They combed through every square foot around the site. K-9 units were brought in, drones scanned the woods from above, and divers prepared to search the lake. Nothing made sense. Nothing about the scene suggested panic or violence, but nothing suggested any rational explanation either. No blood, no personal items missing, no signs of wildlife intrusion, no farewell note, not even a scribbled message in Linda's journal. The campfire, according to investigators, hadn't burned for more than a few hours before the rangers arrived, which meant the family was likely still there by Sunday evening. But after that, silence. That was the last time anyone saw the Chandlers. They had entered the forest as a family of 4 and left behind only stillness. In the 2 weeks following the Chandler family's disappearance, Silver Ridge Lake transformed from a tranquil vacation site into the center of one of the most intense search operations in the state's recent history. The morning after the campsite was discovered, teams began arriving in waves. Search and rescue volunteers, sheriff's deputies, forest rangers, and K-9 units trained specifically for missing persons. By Wednesday, divers were lowering themselves into the cold depths of the lake. Helicopters circled overhead, their shadows sliding across the water like restless birds. Silver Ridge wasn't large by comparison to other Washington lakes, but it had its secrets. Beneath the glassy surface lay 2 natural sinkholes, formed by ancient glacial activity, each over 90 feet deep. These vortex-like cavities were surrounded by jagged underwater ledges and tight crevices, narrow enough for a boot to slip between but deep enough to conceal a backpack. Add to that a network of underground karst fissures, natural cracks formed over centuries, and the lake became a place where objects, and possibly people, could disappear forever. Still, the responders were methodical. Sonar mapping equipment was towed back and forth for hours, producing scans of the lakebed in tightly controlled grids. Divers operated in pairs, plunging into the murky depths despite near-zero visibility in certain pockets. Underwater cameras were dropped with lights, sweeping silently across the floor. They found tree branches, fallen logs, and the occasional tire, but not a single trace of the Chandlers. Not one shoe, not one thread of clothing. The kayak rope was still tied to the tree, undisturbed. 3 complete sonar sweeps were carried out between July 25th and August 7th, 2017. All came back negative. Investigators turned their attention outward. They scanned forest trails for tire tracks, using drones to follow paths that hadn't been touched in years. Volunteers on foot covered a 10-mile radius, some camping overnight to extend the range. Dozens of people were questioned: fishermen, hikers, seasonal workers, and even those living in nearby cabins. Yet no one remembered seeing a family of 4. No one recalled a green Tacoma. There were no unusual sounds, no reported disturbances. It was as if the entire family had simply never existed beyond that campsite. Back in Seattle, digital forensic teams attempted to trace the family's phones. All 4 devices had gone dark late Sunday evening, within minutes of one another. No outgoing calls, no messages, no pings. Attempts to triangulate location data led only to one general result: last known signal, Silver Ridge Lake. Then came another blow. The family's Toyota Tacoma had vanished. No abandoned vehicle was ever found on local roads, no reports of a stolen truck matching its maker plates. Surveillance footage from nearby gas stations and traffic lights was reviewed for days. Nothing. No truck, no passengers. It was as though the vehicle had left no mark at all. Even stranger was the lack of digital footprint in the following days. No banking activity, no credit card charges, no attempts to access email. It was digital silence, complete and unwavering. By early August, media attention exploded. News crews set up vans by the lake entrance. Reporters stood near the cordon, speculating wildly about what could have happened. Headlines read, "Family vanishes without a trace. Was it foul play or force of nature?" And "Curse of Silver Ridge?" Theories ranged from abduction to accidents, even the bizarre: underground cave collapses, cult involvement, and forest illusions. The mysteries seemed to grip the public's imagination. For a moment, the Chandlers' names were everywhere. But as with all stories, the attention faded. In mid-August, devastating wildfires erupted in neighboring Oregon. National focus shifted. Camera crews packed up. Updates about the Chandlers were pushed to the second page, then buried completely. The public's curiosity waned, replaced by newer crises. By the first week of September, active search operations at Silver Ridge Lake were officially suspended. The lake returned to its quiet rhythm, untouched but not forgotten. Detective Sarah Nelson, one of the lead investigators on the case, refused to let it go entirely. She ensured the family's DNA samples remained logged in national databases. Mark Chandler's name stayed active in federal missing persons records. She revisited the file every few months, always hoping for a break. But nothing came. Linda Chandler's mother, Judith, never changed her number. She left her phone on every night, volume turned up, just in case her daughter called. But 6 years would pass, and that call never came. No letter, no signal, not even a whisper across the years. It was as if the lake had swallowed time itself. On the calm morning of June 27, 2023, the surface of Silver Ridge Lake shimmered under a pale sun. The water was unusually still, disturbed only by the rhythmic cast of a fishing line breaking its glassy tension. Harold Bailey, a 63-year-old retired Marine and longtime resident of the region, stood at the end of a weathered wooden dock near the lake's central basin. He was a regular. Every Tuesday, same spot, same old red cooler with 2 sandwiches and a bottle of lemonade. He wasn't fishing for sport anymore. For Harold, it was about habit, rhythm, and quiet. That day, he aimed for deeper waters. He knew the lake's quirks well, how bass would retreat into the drop zones during the warmer months, especially around late June. He flicked his wrist, letting the line sail out far beyond the reeds and float into the shadows. Minutes passed. Then something tugged. At first, he assumed it was another log. Silver Ridge had plenty of submerged driftwood, but the pull was off. It didn't drift or drag. It resisted, then shifted, then sank again. Harold leaned back, gripping the rod harder. The strain on the line grew intense. Whatever it was heavy. He braced his boots against the dock and slowly began to reel it in. 20 minutes passed before he flagged down a passing teen from the nearby campground trail. The boy helped brace the net as the two of them hoisted the object from the water. What emerged was not a fish or a log or even lake debris, but a plastic storage container. Thick, clouded, and industrial grade, wrapped tightly in rusted chains and weighed down with 3 large stones. Its corners were dented, its lid sealed with multiple layers of silver duct tape pressed tight along the edges. It had no labels, no markings, and no signs of recent use on the exterior. Just algae stains and grit. Harold didn't touch it further. Years in the service had taught him a few things, and his instincts were sharp. He backed away, pulled out his phone, and called the non-emergency number for the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. Calmly, he reported the find, described its appearance, and gave coordinates from the laminated map he kept in his cooler. The dispatcher assured him that deputies would be there within the hour. By mid-afternoon, investigators arrived. The container was carefully moved to the edge of the dock, placed inside a temporary field tent for preliminary inspection, and photographed from all sides. One deputy noted how the seal looked intentionally crafted to be both waterproof and tamper-resistant. A decision was made to open it on site, under controlled conditions. When the final strip of tape was cut and the lid carefully lifted, the first item visible was a key ring. It held 3 digital car keys, slightly corroded, yet instantly recognizable. The keys belonged to a Toyota Tacoma, model year 2016, the same make and year as the Chandler family's missing vehicle. Underneath, investigators discovered 4 driver's licenses, neatly aligned in a small waterproof bag. Each one bore the same last name: Mark Chandler, Linda Chandler, Kylie Chandler, Joshua Chandler. The laminated cards had been preserved from water exposure, their edges sharp, photos clear, the names legible. The final object sat at the bottom. A red flashlight, child-sized, faded stickers along the grip. It was unmistakable. The very same flashlight Josh Chandler was known to carry everywhere, even in broad daylight. When lifted, the light suddenly flickered, dim but present. After 6 years submerged, it glowed faintly. A battery that should have died long ago still pulsed. Investigators stared in silence, unsure what to make of it. There were no signs of blood, no clothing, no photographs, no note. Just items that should not have been there, and yet undeniably were. A container built to disappear, yet one that chose that day to rise. News of the find was not made public immediately. Law enforcement knew what it meant. The Chandler case, long considered dormant, had just cracked open. After 6 years, Silver Ridge Lake had finally given something back. Detective Sarah Nelson had carried the Chandler file with her through every transfer, every promotion, and every sleepless night since July 2017. When the case first landed on her desk, she was still new to the Major Crimes Unit in Pierce County, ambitious but cautious. Most of her colleagues leaned toward theories of misadventure, that the family had drowned, gotten lost, or driven off a forest road. But Sarah never believed it. To her, there were too many inconsistencies. The perfectly preserved campsite, the untouched gear, the lack of any signs of panic or exit. It felt staged. And the lake? It had already been searched 3 times. Now, in June 2023, as she stood beneath the canopy tent beside that pulled container, she knew instinct had served her well. The items inside weren't simply misplaced. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide them, chain wrapping, stone weighting, and double sealing the container, likely all underwater for years. That was no accident. That was intention. That was concealment. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. The car keys were wrapped tightly in copper foil, likely an attempt to block tracking or signal detection. That detail alone told her the person responsible understood technology, or at the very least, feared being found through it. It wasn't a spontaneous act. It had planning behind it. The flashlight was perhaps the most unsettling of all. When the forensic team retrieved it, the LED glowed faintly. At first, they assumed it was some anomaly, but further testing suggested it had not been left powered on the entire time. In fact, based on corrosion patterns and voltage levels, it had likely been switched on within the past 12 months. That changed everything. If the flashlight had been touched recently, who had done it? And why would anyone reopen a sealed container they had gone to such effort to hide? Sarah reactivated the case file, pulling archived interviews, satellite imagery, rental logs, and every license issued in the region for the last 6 years. She reassembled the same team. Some retired, others reassigned, and briefed them on what was now being treated as a criminal investigation. Her first move was to return to the lake's surrounding community. They went door to door. Campgrounds, bait shops, marinas, and rental agencies. Dozens of people had come and gone over the years. Some had moved away, others barely remembered 2017. But on the 3rd day, a man named Derek Parker, who managed a seasonal boat rental stand, recalled something that stirred the air in the room. That past winter, he'd noticed an unfamiliar pickup truck parked along the gravel road that looped around the lake. No plates, no state registration stickers. It had shown up several times between December and February, always around dusk. The driver never approached the rental stand, never interacted with staff. Derek only caught glimpses from a distance, but the figure was older, wore a gray hooded coat, and never brought anyone along. The truck always disappeared before dawn. He didn't report it. He assumed it was someone squatting in the woods. Sarah logged the description and filed a request with the DMV for any recent vehicle impound reports that matched. At the same time, her team expanded the paper trail. They began combing through every fishing license issued in the region, digitally and in print. The lake required seasonal permits, and while most were clean, one stood out. It was a 2022 winter fishing license, issued under the name Glenn Marlowe, with an address listed in Tacoma that turned out to be an abandoned storefront. Even more curious, the IP address used to register the license online traced back to a private satellite internet terminal registered just 3 miles from Silver Ridge. That was far too close to be coincidence. Sarah knew what this meant. Someone local, or someone staying nearby, had been circling the lake years after the Chandlers vanished. Someone who had reason to return. Someone who might still be watching. She requested a forensic trace on the IP terminal and dispatched plainclothes deputies to begin surveillance in a 5-mile radius. If this person had gone to such lengths to erase the past, they might have left something behind. And Sarah Nelson had just found the thread. Now, she intended to pull it. Along the southern edge of Silver Ridge Lake, hidden beyond a curtain of cedar trees and brush, stood an old hunting cabin. It hadn't been registered for decades, and no official records listed an owner. Most maps didn't even mark it. Weathered and crooked, the structure leaned slightly to the right, its windows boarded, the front door fastened shut with thick, rusted chains wrapped tightly through the frame and padlocked. There was no path leading to it, only a faint indentation through the undergrowth that hinted someone had been there more than once. Detective Sarah Nelson and her team discovered the cabin during aerial surveillance, after tracing a weak signal from the same satellite terminal used to register the fake fishing license. Ground teams moved in cautiously. They cut the chains and breached the door on a gray morning, stepping into darkness, broken only by slivers of light piercing through warped wooden planks. Inside, the air was stale, the scent of soot and mildew clinging to the walls. Dust coated every surface, but parts of the floor showed recent disturbance. Footprints through ash, threads of torn fabric, a trail of dried mud leading from the entrance to the fireplace. They fanned out, documenting every inch. That's when Sarah found it. In the corner, beneath a broken chair and bundled tarp, was a scorched, leather-bound journal. The cover had been partially burned, the spine cracked, but the initials on the front were still visible. LC. She turned the fragile pages with gloved hands. Most had turned to ash, but a few remained, edges singed. In delicate, slanted handwriting, someone had recorded brief entries. Words like cold, keeps watching, and Josh asked about mom again were barely legible. The final entry ended mid-sentence. Beside the journal, buried under a thin layer of old cloth, lay a child's toy. A plush fox, once orange, now faded to a sickly gray. One ear was torn, its button eye loose. Dirt stained its belly, and part of the stitching along the tail had come undone. Sarah didn't need to ask who it belonged to. Josh Chandler had been photographed with a similar toy in every family picture before the trip. But it was what they found next that froze the room. Tucked inside a cardboard shoebox beneath the cot were several Polaroid photos. They were relatively fresh, their colors sharp, the chemical finish glossy. Sarah flipped through them, one by one. Forest backgrounds, lake shorelines, close-up shots of bare walls. Then, on the fourth image, she stopped breathing. It was Kylie, older than in the missing posters, but unmistakably her. She stood near the edge of the water, arms at her sides, expression blank but her eyes wide, uncertain, almost pleading. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and jeans rolled above her ankles. Her shoes were mismatched. Behind her, on the far right edge of the frame, was the shadow of a man, just his silhouette, blurry but visible, elongated across the dirt, as if captured moments before he stepped forward. Sarah studied the edges. The paper was in near-perfect condition. The timestamp on the back had partially smudged, but lab analysis later dated the print to no more than 18 months prior. This wasn't a relic from 2017. It was recent. Someone had been with her, long after the search ended. Evidence technicians sealed and removed everything. The journal, the toy, the photos. Forensics later confirmed traces of DNA on the fox, consistent with samples submitted by the Chandler's extended family. Even more chilling, partial fingerprints found on the photographs matched none in national databases. Whoever had taken them had no official record. Sarah stood at the edge of the cabin, watching her team pack the evidence into labeled containers. She didn't speak for several minutes. There had always been a question in the back of her mind, an unspoken dread she kept buried beneath the logistics, paperwork, and interviews. But now, that doubt was no longer a theory. This hadn't been a disappearance. It had been a separation. Someone had isolated them, taken them, and, at least for a time, kept them alive. The image of Kylie's eyes, not screaming, not crying, but quietly imploring, stayed with Sarah long after she left the site. The kind of look that said everything without a sound. For the first time since 2017, the case shifted in tone. No longer just a search for answers. It had become something darker. Someone had watched them, and someone still might be watching. The name came quietly, almost by accident. A marina employee recalled a man who had once serviced outboard motors in a workshop near the western shore. He wasn't local, not exactly, but he'd been around long enough that people stopped asking questions. His name was Alvin Huffer, 55 years old, lived alone in a weather-worn trailer 12 miles south of Silver Ridge Lake. He kept mostly to himself. Fixed engines, took cash payments, always wore the same brown jacket, regardless of season. Sarah Nelson pulled his file. It was thin. One minor arrest 5 years back for carrying a firearm without proper registration. No jail time, no outstanding warrants, no listed relatives. But something felt off. The photo ID on file didn't match older DMV records under the same name. Facial analysis software flagged inconsistencies, slight but undeniable. Within 48 hours, her team uncovered the truth. Alvin Huffer wasn't his original identity. A decade prior, he'd legally changed his name in a different state, using falsified documentation and a falsified birth certificate. His old name had been scrubbed, his record sealed. Someone doesn't go to such lengths unless they're hiding something. Sarah approved discreet surveillance. 2 plainclothes deputies parked down the road from the trailer and rotated in 12-hour shifts. Alvin's routine was simple. He stayed indoors most days, occasionally drove an unregistered pickup, no plates, walked a medium-sized black dog twice a day, never spoke to neighbors, always took the same trail behind his lot, heading east toward a forested buffer zone that eventually fed into a narrow ravine beneath the highway. 10 days into the surveillance, just before 7 a.m., Alvin emerged from the trailer. The dog was on a leash. He wore a thick canvas jacket and gloves despite the summer heat. He walked slower than usual, head down, eyes scanning the woods. Sarah had joined the team in person that morning, following from a distance with 2 federal agents. She didn't speak. She just watched. For 30 minutes, he led them deeper through the brush, past fallen logs and thorny undergrowth. Then he stopped. Ahead was a concrete drainage tunnel running beneath the state highway. Most would have ignored it. It looked like any other forgotten structure in the woods. But Alvin moved toward it with purpose. The entrance was blocked by a crisscross of logs and branches, arranged with unsettling precision. As he knelt to adjust one of the logs, Sarah gave the signal. The agents moved in quickly, surrounding him before he could step back. Alvin didn't speak. He looked at them, let go of the dog's leash, and raised both hands slowly. Inside the tunnel, beneath the debris, they found a hidden space. It was dry, packed with pine needles and dirt. Near the center lay scattered fragments, bone, several, in fact, mixed with clothing fibers and scraps of canvas. A single object lay closest to the opening, a child's school backpack, faded blue, the zipper half broken, and stitched into the back in permanent marker were 2 unmistakable words: Josh Chandler. Sarah froze, the name burning behind her eyes. She had seen it countless times, in reports, in files, in Linda's journal, but now it was here, in the dirt, in a place no child should ever have been. One of the agents called for backup. The crime scene was secured, and Alvin was placed into custody without incident. He didn't resist. At the station, under questioning, Alvin said nothing. He declined legal counsel, but didn't answer a single question. No protest, no emotion. He stared blankly at the wall across from him, blinking slowly, as if none of it registered. Sarah sat across from him for 3 hours, asking about the Chandler family, about the backpack, about the concrete tunnel. He never spoke. His silence filled the room like fog. Forensics later confirmed the remains were human. Partial dental records and mitochondrial DNA matched those of Josh Chandler. The backpack contained crumpled notebook pages, a pencil case, and a toy car, all consistent with what Josh had last been seen with in 2017. The cause of death was listed as inconclusive. Too much time had passed. But the implications were clear. The case was no longer about disappearance. It was now officially about loss. Sarah stepped out of the interrogation room with the weight of 6 years crashing into her chest. One answer had finally surfaced, and 100 new questions waited behind it. The trailer was a patchwork of rusted metal and makeshift repairs, tucked at the edge of a forgotten clearing just beyond a broken fence line. After Alvin Huffer was taken into custody, investigators obtained a warrant and began their search. The interior was cluttered but organized in a strange, deliberate way. Tools hanging on hooks, paper maps rolled tightly in tubes, and jars filled with bolts arranged by size. But what caught their attention was a battered gray laptop sitting beneath a folded tarp on a workbench. Dust lined the edges, but the keyboard showed signs of frequent use. The screen bore smudge marks, as if someone had handled it carefully, always with the same pattern of fingers. They powered it on. A password prompt appeared. Investigators tried a few combinations based on common guesses, birthdays, names, basic phrases. Nothing worked. Then someone noticed the small label stickered to the laptop's side, SRL memory. It didn't take long after that. The password was Shadzio Lake. Once inside, they found a folder labeled with a simple number, 2017. Inside that, dozens of video files, some just a few minutes long, others extending past an hour. The thumbnails showed forest scenes, tent fabric, and at times, the outline of a family. It became instantly clear what they were looking at. Surveillance footage, grainy but stable, recorded by a fixed camera mounted somewhere high in the trees. Date stamps on the bottom corners verified the timeline. The first few clips showed only scenery. The edge of the woods, the lake shore, patches of the Chandler campsite. Then, without warning, people appeared. The family. Mark tending the fire. Linda pouring water into a kettle. Kylie skipping stones. Josh chasing something just out of frame with his flashlight. Their voices were muffled, but present. Moments of laughter. The creak of the tent zipper. Birds overhead. Then a shadow. Alvin's figure entered the frame from a distance, partially hidden, watching from behind a tree. Clip after clip showed him drawing closer each day. On one recording, he crouched and appeared to be adjusting something beneath a pile of leaves, likely the very camera capturing the footage. His movements were calm, patient, practiced. In another, he was seen standing just 20 feet from the tent, motionless for minutes at a time. His expression, when caught by the lens, was unreadable, vacant, almost mechanical. The most disturbing videos came near the end. In one, he approached the children directly while Mark and Linda were distracted by the fire. He knelt to Josh's level, said something inaudible, then turned to Kylie and gestured toward the woods. Linda appeared in the background moments later, speaking to him cautiously. She looked uncertain, uncomfortable, but not alarmed. Alvin handed her something. She examined it briefly, and then she nodded. The next video, time-stamped July 23, 2017, 7:42 p.m., showed movement at the campsite. The tent flaps were open. The cooler was closed. The fire was down to embers. The family appeared to be packing up. Within 20 minutes, the Chandler's Toyota Tacoma came into view, slowly reversing away from the lake. It turned left, away from the main road, and disappeared into the trees. Kylie was visible in the passenger seat. It was the last known image of any member of the family still alive. The files were immediately transferred to the FBI. Within 48 hours, agents uncovered a sealed report from 2009 out of Missouri. It described a missing persons case involving a teenage girl who vanished near a campground under circumstances eerily similar. No signs of struggle, no digital trail, a campsite left in pristine condition. A man named Ellis Harmon had briefly been a suspect, a quiet loner with mechanical skills and a vague work history. The case had gone cold. Ellis Harmon vanished shortly after questioning Alvin Huffer's former identity. Further digging revealed other oddities: pharmacy records, false names used to purchase sedatives, and a pattern of remote rentals within 5 states, all near lakes or forests. While not definitive, the evidence began to form a chilling pattern. It appeared Alvin had a method. He would watch, wait, isolate, and then intervene. If patterns from the laptop files held true, he didn't act out of rage or impulse. He believed he was building something, a version of family, of control. Victims weren't simply taken. They were repositioned, given new roles within his fractured concept of companionship. When they resisted, or when his control began to slip, he found ways to silence the chaos. Sarah Nelson watched hours of footage in a dark briefing room, the glow of the screen reflecting off her tired eyes. For years, the case had felt like vapor, ungraspable. Now, here it was, frame by frame, image by image, not just theory, evidence. The horror was no longer what might have happened. It was what had already been captured. Among the many video files retrieved from Alvin Huffer's laptop, one stood apart. Its timestamp read August 3, 2020. The file name was nothing more than a string of numbers. No labels, no metadata. At first glance, the footage appeared grainy, filmed in low light. A single bulb swung faintly from above, casting uneven shadows along metallic walls. The setting wasn't familiar. It wasn't outdoors. It wasn't a cabin or forest or trailer. It was underground. And in the center of the frame, sitting cross-legged on a thin mattress, was a girl. She looked to be around 16. Long brown hair, pale skin. Her eyes stared directly into the lens. She didn't blink often. There was no visible motion in the background, no sound beyond the soft hum of the camera. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between exhaustion and defiance. A faint bruise darkened the area beneath her left eye, just visible under the overhead glare. Her hands rested limply on her knees. She said nothing. Investigators paused the footage and magnified the frame. Details emerged: the stitched hem of the oversized shirt she wore, torn fabric near the mattress edge, a bolt welded into the wall just behind her shoulder. But the clearest and most heartbreaking detail was her face. It resembled Kylie Chandler. Older, yes, thinner, but the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the faint curve in her brow, it all matched earlier photos taken before her disappearance in 2017. Facial recognition software ran comparisons and returned a 92% match. That alone was enough. The girl on the screen was almost certainly Kylie, alive 3 years after she vanished, and she was being held. The FBI launched an immediate multi-agency response. All known properties tied to Alvin, past and present, were flagged. Sarah Nelson coordinated ground units to revisit every cabin, workshop, and rental property in a 100-mile radius. Old utility bills were traced. Satellite imaging was cross-referenced for terrain disturbances. Eventually, a tip led them to a clearing deep within a state-managed forest, land not owned by Alvin directly, but leased once under an alias. There, hidden beneath a rotted wooden shed, they found a hatch. The air inside was dense, sealed for years. The structure was reinforced with poured concrete walls and steel panels. At the bottom of a narrow stairwell lay a rectangular room, bare, cold, and silent. The dimensions matched the video perfectly. Same bolts, same wall seams, same light fixture, though now dark. A mattress lay flattened in the corner, mildew seeping along its edges. On a nearby shelf, a camera sat, still functional, its battery drained. But the room was empty. No one was there, no signs of struggle, no blood, no belongings left behind, just silence and dust. As the team swept the room, one of the agents called out from near the far wall. Scratched faintly into the metal behind the bed frame were uneven lines of text, written with something sharp, possibly a nail or a piece of wire. 4 words. "I'm not dead. Yet. Casey." Sarah ran her gloved fingers over the carving, feeling the indentations as if they could speak. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. This wasn't just a space. It had been a cell, a place of waiting, of surviving. The room was photographed from every angle. Forensics examined dust patterns, hoping to determine how recently someone had been there. Based on the layer of settled debris, it was likely vacated no more than a year prior. That meant Kylie, or whoever had left the message, was alive well after 2020, possibly longer, but where she had gone after that remained unknown. There were no footprints outside the bunker, no tire tracks, no DNA that didn't already belong to Alvin. Whoever had been there had left quietly and carefully, leaving behind only a single, haunting message. "I'm not dead. Yet." To Sarah, those words weren't just a cry. They were a challenge, proof of will, a whisper of resistance that had outlasted silence, a thread of hope in a case that had once felt lost. Kylie Chandler was out there, and now they knew it. On the morning of August 6th, 2023, just over 6 weeks after the discovery of the sealed container in Silver Ridge Lake, a quiet call came into the Pierce County Sheriff's Office from a rural farmer named Glenn McCrae. He lived 50 miles southeast of the lake, near the outskirts of a long-abandoned greenhouse complex, once used for seasonal crops, but left to decay after funding dried up. Glenn rarely ventured near the structure, but that morning, while tending to irrigation pipes, he noticed movement inside the frame of the ruined building. A barefoot girl. She was thin, unnaturally so, and crouched behind a cracked panel of glass. Her clothing hung loosely on her frame, and her hair, dark and tangled, obscured part of her face. He called out. She didn't answer. She backed away. That was all it took. Glenn called it in. A patrol unit was dispatched immediately. 40 minutes later, officers arrived at the greenhouse. They moved cautiously, announcing their presence, expecting perhaps a runaway or someone in distress. What they found inside brought the air to a standstill. A teenage girl, sitting near the edge of a rusted workbench, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent in the summer light, and her limbs bore the hallmarks of long-term malnourishment. Her cheeks were sunken. Her eyes, wide, fixed, alert, moved rapidly across the room, tracking every sound. She didn't speak. She didn't resist. She only watched. Paramedics were called to the scene. The girl didn't respond to questions. She flinched at sudden motion, avoided eye contact, and refused food or water until they wrapped her in a blanket and dimmed the ambulance lights. It was only once she was stabilized at the county hospital that they were able to take her fingerprints. A match returned within hours. Kylie Chandler. She was alive. The news traveled like electricity through the task force. After 6 years, the name that had become a symbol of loss now became a symbol of return. Sarah Nelson arrived at the hospital before sunset. Kylie was awake, but silent, guarded. She looked at the people around her, but didn't seem to register them. She held tightly to the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, as if it anchored her to something real. For 7 days, she spoke no words. Doctors, trauma specialists, and officers came and went, each waiting, hoping. She listened. She stared out the window. She slept lightly, waking at even the softest creak. On the 8th day, with Sarah sitting quietly in the room, Kylie whispered her first word. Josh. It was barely audible, but it cracked open the silence. The following days were slow. Through halting, tearful fragments, Kylie began to share what had happened, some of it out loud, some written shakily on a notepad when she couldn't find her voice. After the family was taken from the campsite in 2017, they had been separated. Their captor, Alvin Huffer, had brought them to a hidden shelter and divided them, Mark and Linda in one room, the children in another. Communication between them had been limited. Her mother, Linda, grew sick within a year. The damp, confined conditions wore on her. When a wound on her leg became infected, she was denied proper treatment. In early 2018, Linda passed away in the dark. Her last words whispered to Kylie through the wall. Josh had tried to protect his sister. When he realized their captor was planning to move them again, somewhere deeper, he attempted to escape through a drainage pipe. He never made it far. Kylie didn't see what happened. She only heard the water. Then silence. After that, she was kept alone. The bunker became her world, a mattress, a bucket, a single light. Her meals delivered once a day, no clock, no calendar, only time, stretching endlessly. In 2020, Alvin began to grow slower. She noticed it first in his walk, then in how he forgot things. He stopped locking the hatch as tightly. He left a key under a box, thinking it was hidden. And one morning, he didn't come. She waited. Hours passed, then days. On the 3rd night, Kylie climbed the stairs and pushed the hatch. It opened. She ran. No shoes, no map, just instinct and distance. She followed forest lines, avoided roads, lived on berries and rainwater. When she found the greenhouse, she stayed. It was shelter. It was dry. And for the first time in years, she was free. Sarah stood outside her hospital room as agents quietly relayed the details. Tears welled behind her eyes but didn't fall. Not yet. The fight wasn't over. But the light had broken through. Kylie Chandler had endured what no child should, but she had survived. And in that, there was hope. In October 2023, the case that had haunted Silver Ridge for over 6 years came to its solemn conclusion inside the Pierce County Superior Court. The trial of Alvin Huffer lasted 17 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, fingerprints, digital files, witness testimony, and the forensic findings from the concrete bunker. Piece by piece, a portrait of methodical cruelty was laid bare before the court, and by the time the final arguments were made, no doubt remained. Alvin Huffer was found guilty on all 14 counts. Among them, multiple charges of abduction, unlawful imprisonment, evidence tampering, aggravated assault, and 2 counts of homicide. Each conviction echoed like a bell through the courtroom, and when the sentence was read, life in prison without the possibility of parole, the room sat in a silence that was not shock, but release. He showed no emotion as the verdict was delivered. He stood motionless, staring forward as if the weight of consequence no longer had a hold on him. But just behind him, in the second row of the courtroom, sat the reason the case had not ended in total darkness. Kylie Chandler. She was 17 now. Her frame was still thin, her skin pale from the years spent away from sunlight, but her eyes, those wide, quietly defiant eyes, held something else, something unshaken. Her voice was soft, nearly a whisper, when she walked to the witness stand to deliver her statement during sentencing. The room held its breath as she unfolded a handwritten note. "My brother died a hero," she began, her words clear even through the tremble. "My mom was an angel. She held us together for as long as she could, and me, I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. He didn't break me. He made me stronger. Every person in the courtroom remained still, some with heads bowed, others watching her with silent tears. The judge nodded slowly, and Sarah Nelson, sitting near the front, closed her eyes. For her, it wasn't just a statement. It was a full-circle moment. The missing girl had not only been found, she had reclaimed her voice. Later that month, the Chandler family was laid to rest together, as they should have been, side by side beneath the pines near Silver Ridge Lake. A memorial service was held on the western bank, with over 200 people attending, some family, many strangers who had followed their story from the very beginning. The ashes of Mark and Linda, along with symbolic stones for Josh, were placed in a shared urn beneath a smooth granite marker. The inscription read, "And still she survived." Those words, chosen by Kylie herself, were more than tribute. They were testimony. Just a short walk from the memorial site in the Silver Ridge Community Museum, one item rests in a glass case. A red flashlight, faded, worn, but intact. The same one Josh had carried that summer, the one recovered years later from the bottom of the lake. It had flickered faintly when first found, its glow stubborn despite time and pressure. Now, every year on July 21st, the museum staff turns it on again, a single beam of light, not just in remembrance, but as a promise, that even in silence, someone remembers, that even in darkness, someone endures. The Chandler case may be closed in legal terms, but in the hearts of those who watched it unfold, those who searched, who wept, who hoped, the story lives on. It is a story of tragedy, yes, but more than that, it is a story of survival, of a girl who walked out of the shadows and brought the truth with her.